Okay, let's take a look at chapter 8, which is all about listening. And I really like the subtitle because we don't always think about this, receiving and responding. So as we go through this chapter, much as I ask you to do for every chapter, I want you to not just think about the concepts in theory, but think about how they apply to you in particular. So let's start with figuring out what listening is all about. So as we go through, this is a relatively brief section. As we go through this, and then of course when we get to the end, I would like you to be able to describe the nature of listening and also the listening styles that interpersonal communicators use. This is a very brief I say brief, I'm never brief. This is an overview, and then we start drilling down in other sections. So, why is it important to listen? Oh, and I should say before we start, if you were to rate yourself as a listener on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being not very good and 10 being excellent, where do you believe you are as a listener in general? I know it depends on what the situation is and who you're with and how you're feeling, but just overall. Okay, so why is listening so important? Well, we'll look at this from a work perspective. The people who are working say, oops, I see a typo already, that listening is the most common communication behavior that's needed in their job. And this goes from whether you are working in an office or on a machine shop floor or in a hospital. Okay. So then when they continue to talk to people in the workforce, managers said that when they are hiring new people, one of the things that they're really looking for is the ability to listen, because managers realize that they can teach people the skills that are needed. You know, you're working on a computer. They can teach you the specific program that's used. They can teach you how to draw blood. It's much harder to teach someone how to be an effective listener. I thought this third point was really interesting, that employees who have a supervisor who is the textbook uses the word empathic. Ugh. I prefer empathetic, but that's okay. An empathic listener, they are less stressed at work, but they're also less stressed at home. So let's look at that from the opposite way. If you have a boss who does not listen empathically, you're going to be stressed at work and you're going to take that stress home with you. Okay, so Alexia, this made me think of you because I think you said you work in customer service. So customer service reps have to listen both to the message that's being expressed, but also to the emotions behind it. And what they're finding is people who are calling in to customer service don't just want the specific problem resolved. They want to feel that the other person really heard them. Okay, so bottom line, listening is perhaps the most important communication skill at work, in families, and in any kind of interpersonal relationship that you have. Okay, so what is listening? And I like this cartoon from the previous textbook where the patient is saying to the doctor, you're not listening to what you're hearing. Okay, so we're going to look at, well, what is the difference between listening and hearing? So listening is the process of receiving and responding to others' messages. And that's hence the subtitle of this chapter. Okay, the textbook says, obviously as we're moving more and more into mediated messages, listening is a part of that, even though we're not, in that case, listening with our ears. But we're not going to talk about that this chapter. This is going to focus on that listening that it has the auditory function. Okay, so hearing is a physiological process where sound waves strike the eardrum and that causes vibrations, and those vibrations are transmitted to the brain. That's what happens in hearing. What happens in listening is when those vibrations are transmitted to the brain and the brain says, this is what it means. So listening is when we're really involved in making meaning. So I usually say to my classes, when we think about the big four skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, you had in school explicit instruction in writing. You probably had an awful lot of it. And you had explicit instruction in reading. And for most students have to take a public speaking class, you will have explicit instruction in speaking. Where do you ever have instruction in listening? We human beings think it's automatic. We don't have to teach it. But I would argue that everyone should have some kind of practice doing this. Okay, so this is one of my favorite graphics, which is on the right side of the screen, which is the Chinese characters, that make up the verb to listen. So you have the ear, the eyes, the heart, and undivided attention. And really think about this is what goes into truly listening. So we, as human beings, do an awful lot of mindless listening, where we react to messages automatically. We're not even thinking about it. Somebody says, you see someone and you say, "Hey, how you doing?" And they go, "Oh, fine." But their tone of voice is saying, "I'm not fine." And we probably, "Hey, how you doing?" "Oh, I'm fine." "Oh, great, great." We're kind of mindlessly listening. Okay. I've always felt that mindless listening is bad. Okay. It's not effective. It's not valuable. And the textbook makes a really great point, which is if you had to pay careful attention to every single bit of information that you heard, you would probably go insane. So frequently we kind of put ourselves on automatic and we just let we do that kind of, Okay. However, there are times when it is important to listen mindfully. So when we do mindful listening, we are giving careful and thoughtful attention to the messages we receive, and we're making sure that we're responding carefully and thoughtfully to those messages. Which, again, let me go back to this. We're using our ears, we're using our eyes, we're giving this person undivided attention, and we are using our heart. Okay, so on page 214, there's a very brief assessment. Assess your learning style. So I definitely want you to, there's a grand total of 16 questions. And as they say, don't overthink this. Just go in and answer fairly quickly and find out of these four, which one do you do most often? What's your go-to listening? Okay, we have task-oriented listeners, or we do task-oriented listening. The bottom line is we want to be efficient. We want to accomplish the job. Maybe I would say that people who are, have to do a delivery. They say, okay, what are the packages? Where do they have to go? That's what's most important to them. Tell me what I got to do, when I have to do it, and I will go do it. Okay. Another type is relational listening, where the most important thing is to build a relationship with someone, to listen to the emotions behind the message so that you can become closer to the person. Obviously, the counselors, therapists do this quite a bit. Oops, should have turned off my email. The third kind is analytical listening, where a person would listen to the entire message before judging. I don't think a lot of people do this. I think we can be trained to do this, but I would say that the ordinary person hears about 2 seconds and has already made up their mind. They're not listening to all of it. Critical listening happens when your main purpose is to evaluate the message, and not just what was said, but how it was said. When I used to teach public speaking, I did a lot of critical listening when a student had to do their specific speech. I was paying attention to what were they saying, How did they move? Was their voice loud enough? Did they have gestures? Did they gesture too much? How many times did they say the word So that was an example of critical listening. Now, obviously, we all have the ability to do all of these, and we do all of these. The question becomes, whatever styles you use, it's important to recognize that you can control the way you listen. Okay. When your relationship with the speaker needs attention, adopt a relational approach. If investigation is called for, put on your analytical persona. When there's a need for evaluation, become a critical listener. Okay. Bottom line, you can become more effective by assessing and adapting to the listening preferences and styles of your conversational partners. So it's not just you in the situation. You also have to take into account the other person. All right, let's see. Can you, by listening to this lecture or going back into the text, can you tell me what the difference is between hearing and listening? Do you know what mindless listening is? Do you know what mindful listening is? Can you tell me what the 4 different listening styles there are that were presented at the beginning of the chapter? And I'd like you to think about the specific times that you've used each of these styles and what is your dominant listening style? Is it working for you? And if not, what can you do about it? All right, so this was the first section. In a little bit, I have to drink some water. We're going to go on and I will talk about the challenges of listening. Oops, I jumped the gun there.